Let's talk about Lebanon. Well, let's go straight over to former Major General, former Army officer and military logistics expert, Major General Tim Cross. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
All right, nice to see you.
Now, it's an extraordinary situation now in the Middle East. Today, Israel did confirm our worst suspicions that they are planning a full-scale land invasion of Lebanon. We already know they pounded that benighted country with thousands of bombs, 1,600 in a single night a couple of nights ago, around about 600 deaths and rising. And we're also hearing that there are as many as 10,000 British people, who are trapped in that country, and that 700 British troops have been sent to Cyprus, nearby Cyprus, and they may be planning some kind of Dunkirk-style evacuation, presumably from the beaches. I mean, first of all, before we get to that evacuation, your thoughts on the fact that Israel has confirmed today that the IDF are planning a full-scale land invasion. That will seriously escalate the situation in the Middle East, won't it?
Yes, it will. I'm not that convinced that they're going to do that immediately. I mean, I saw the news earlier on with the senior officer just chatting to the guys, and I sort of hesitate to read too much into it in the context of whether this is about to happen. I'm quite surprised that they would, even consider a major land incursion into Lebanon. If I'm honest, Gaza's still going on, of course. I think it's probably linked to the fact that they think that Hezbollah is on the run, and Iran and Hezbollah have made it quite clear that they don't want to have a full-scale military operation with Israel. And Israel may be seeing that, Netanyahu and his government may be seeing that as a sign of weakness and an opportunity to drive them back. But this will be a big operation. And the last time Israel went into Lebanon, it didn't end well. So in a way, I would be very surprised if they did put a major land incursion. But there's no doubt about it. Over the last 2 or 3 days, that's the way we seem to be going.
Indeed. But either way, we've got a very serious situation, and we're told that 10,000 Brits are kind of trapped in the Lebanon. And 700 troops have been sent to nearby Cyprus with a view to orchestrating some kind of Dunkirk-style evacuation. So if we do that, Tim, how do we do it? We send boats to the beaches and literally lift them off? Or how does this happen?
Well, first of all, Cyprus is, of course, a military strategic base for the UK. We have 2 sovereign base areas in Cyprus, including the RAF station at Akrotiri, and an army regiment is permanently based there, along with other UK resources. There's 500 were deployed a little bit earlier, a few days or weeks ago, and the additional 700 have gone over now, as you say, to prepare for what is called a non-combatant evacuation order. Now, this is not new. We've actually moved people out of Lebanon in the past. I served in Cyprus for a while back in the 1980s. And we have, good plans in place. We've used this in various parts of the world before. In terms of the Lebanon, there are 3 or 4 options. One is that the civilian airport would continue to be operational, and that UK citizens could go to that airport and be flown out on civilian airliners. And that, obviously, from a government point of view, is the preferred option. And I think people have been doing that, and some will have been leaving overland. There's quite a debate about how many thousand Brits are there, but certainly several thousand. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. If that airport was to become unusable for civilian aircraft, then we could use military aircraft to land on that airfield. And that would be UK military, and presumably other nations would be doing the same thing. And we have got the ability to run an airport like that if necessary. But Lebanese authorities would probably be able to continue to run it, but they just, civilian aircraft would not be allowed to take off. If that fails, you're then into a seaborne evacuation, which is, relatively large ships leaving Cyprus, and then people being taken off the beach on smaller boats and then ferried out to the Navy. And that's something we have done before. It's the least preferred option because the air option is far easier. And of course, any of those options will carry some sort of risk with them. So there'll be a risk assessment. Cobra will have assessing the risks. But I don't think that Lebanese or indeed Israel or Hezbollah will want to stop international people leaving Lebanon. They won't want to try and put a halt to it. So I don't think the risk is enormous, but there's always a risk of unintended consequences, things going wrong with military operations. So there'll be plans in place that we've used before. As I say, we've trained, the guys will have trained with that. And I'm pretty confident it would go relatively smoothly.
If it does happen, it would be a remarkable story. Now, you indicated there, Tim, that Hezbollah will probably allow this. They won't want to get in the way of the evacuation of British citizens, or indeed all foreign citizens. However, I mean, they do have a propensity towards firing rockets left, right and centre. Suppose we send some ships and Hezbollah decide to fire some rockets at us, at our ships. What do we do?
Yeah, well, that is certainly a possibility. I don't think it's a probability, but there's always the chance that you're going to have individual people, or indeed small groups of Hezbollah, who would decide to take things into their own hands, if you like. And that again will have been looked at in various planning options. I mean, for an operation like this, there's always 2 or 3 options that are being looked at, and people will play through the scenarios, and we'll have exactly that conversation and raise that question that you've just raised. What would we do? Now, we are, under this operation, there will be very clear rules of engagement, and they will apply underneath the laws of armed conflict, the Geneva Conventions, et cetera, et cetera. We would not start to launch, a major military assault in Lebanon. So the intention would be to restrict and limit as much as possible any response to a rogue missile or rocket or whatever. So, even in worst case, if there are a couple of rockets launched at the ships or the evacuation, our response would be as minimal as possible, minimum force, and just continue to try and get people out. And of course, it's the safety of the civilians that are the most important issue. So at some point, if it was necessary, you'd have to stop the evacuation.
And can you quite believe what's happening over there in the Middle East? I mean, not so long ago, we were all worried about Gaza. We still are, of course. But all of a sudden, Israel looks north, and the pace of this conflict, the escalation, I think, has been extraordinary. So what was it? Was it last week we were talking about walkie-talkies and pagers being blown up in people's pockets? I mean, that was a tragedy. People died there, but there was something almost sort of James Bond funny about that. I don't mean to underplay the tragedy of it, but you know what I'm saying. People go, oh, that's an intriguing story. And then suddenly this week, this almighty pounding, this bombing, this extraordinary bombing, and now talk of a land invasion. Are you surprised at the speed of this escalation?
Yeah, I think the speed of what's been happening in the last few days has surprised, I think, many of us. But without going over the history of it, of course, what we're talking about here is a deeply ingrained issue that goes back to 1948, the formation of Israel, through the 56 war. I remember as a child, the 1967 war, the 73. These are deeply ingrained issues here, and the bottom line is this violence, this circular violence that goes on, will only be broken if somehow the diplomats can get around the table, the politicians can get around the table, and find some solution. I have to say, it is very difficult to see what that solution would be. People talk about the 2-state solution. Others say that would never work. The hatred within Hezbollah of Israel, the hatred of Hamas with Israel, these people genuinely want to see Israel wiped out. They are, of course, terrorist-described organizations. So many of them are pretty brutal guys. And Israel is, not going to go away. It certainly
isn't. Yeah. No, Tim, I'm going to have to go, but thank you very, very much for your time. That was fascinating stuff.